The most powerful religious institution in the world had declared war on a man who sang love songs. On a gray October morning in 1966, Cardinal Alessandro Fontana sat across from Dean Martin in a windowless room beneath St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, flanked by two monsignors and armed with a moral authority that had toppled kings and shaped empires for 2,000 years. The air was heavy with incense and tension. A single crucifix dominated the wall behind the cardinal's chair, casting a long shadow across the mahogany table that separated the holy from the profane. What happened in that underground chamber over the next 90 minutes would pit two different visions of salvation against each other, one that promised redemption through suffering, and one that offered it through joy. Cardinal Fontana believed he was saving souls. Dean Martin believed the cardinal was destroying them. The battle that erupted between them wasn't just about entertainment or morality. It was about the fundamental question of how human beings should live, love, and find meaning in an increasingly complex world. And when the smoke cleared, only one man would walk out of that room with his convictions intact. The meeting had been 6 months in the making. Vatican Intelligence, a network of priests, nuns, and Catholic laypeople that rivaled any government spy organization, had been monitoring what they called the Martin situation since 1964. Reports flowed in from parishes across America and beyond. Italian-American families were abandoning traditional Catholic entertainment in favor of Dean Martin records. Children were singing "That's Amore" instead of hymns. Teenagers were modeling their behavior on Dean's casual relationship with alcohol, rather than the Church's teachings on temperance. But the final straw had been Dean's appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show 3 weeks earlier. During his performance of Everybody Loves Somebody, Dean had winked at the camera while singing the line, "Everybody loves somebody sometime," and the Vatican had interpreted this as a direct mockery of celibacy. The Church's moral guardians saw it as Dean Martin suggesting that even priests and nuns were subject to romantic desire, a corruption of sacred vows disguised as innocent entertainment. Cardinal Fontana was the Vatican's enforcer, a man who had spent 30 years stamping out what the Church considered moral pollution in Catholic communities worldwide. He had banned books, shut down theaters, and convinced governments to censor films. At 62, he possessed the kind of absolute certainty that comes from never doubting that God was on your side. He had requested this meeting through intermediaries, using the Church's extensive network to apply pressure on Dean's management until a face-to-face confrontation became inevitable. Dean arrived at St. Patrick's Cathedral at exactly 10 in the morning, wearing a dark navy suit that seemed appropriately respectful for a religious setting. He was escorted through a maze of corridors beneath the cathedral by a young priest who spoke only in whispers, as if normal conversation might wake something that should remain sleeping. The walls were lined with religious artwork depicting various martyrs in their moments of greatest suffering, a decorative choice that Dean noted with his characteristic dry humor. The meeting room was deliberately austere. No windows, minimal lighting, uncomfortable chairs designed to make visitors feel small and penitent. Cardinal Fontana had arranged the space like a tribunal, with himself elevated slightly behind the mahogany table, and Dean positioned in a lower chair facing him. Two monsignors flanked the cardinal like silent sentinels, their faces carefully arranged in expressions of disapproving concern. Cardinal Fontana wasted no time on pleasantries. He opened a thick folder filled with photographs, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be surveillance reports, evidence of Dean's corrupting influence on Catholic families around the world. "Mr. Martin," the cardinal began, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of moral authority, "we have called this meeting because your influence on Catholic youth has become a matter of serious concern to the Holy See." Dean leaned back in his chair, seemingly relaxed, despite the intimidating atmosphere. "I appreciate your concern, Your Eminence, but I'm not sure I understand what I've done wrong. I sing songs, I make movies, I try to entertain people. That's my job." "Your job," Cardinal Fontana replied, spreading photographs across the table, "is corrupting the moral fiber of Catholic families worldwide. These images show young people at your concerts behaving in ways that are completely inappropriate for good Catholics, dancing suggestively, drinking alcohol, embracing romantic passion over spiritual devotion." The photographs showed Dean's audiences, teenagers and young adults, clearly enjoying themselves, dancing, laughing, holding hands. To Cardinal Fontana, these images represented moral decay. To Dean, they represented life being lived to the fullest. "They look happy to me," Dean said simply. "Happiness is not the goal of human existence, Mr. Martin. Salvation is, and your version of happiness is leading souls away from God and toward temporal pleasures that ultimately damn them." Dean studied the cardinal's face, noting the deep lines of perpetual concern, the eyes that seemed to see sin in every shadow. "With respect, Your Eminence, I think we have different definitions of what it means to serve God. I make people happy. I bring joy into their lives. I help them forget their troubles for a little while. If that's corruption, then I guess we'll have to agree to disagree." Cardinal Fontana's face darkened. This wasn't going according to plan. He had expected contrition, perhaps even conversion. Instead, he was facing a man who seemed genuinely puzzled by the Church's concern. "Mr. Martin, your casual attitude toward alcohol promotes the sin of gluttony. Your romantic songs encourage lustful thoughts outside of marriage. Your entire persona represents a worldly approach to life that is fundamentally incompatible with Christian virtue." Dean lit a cigarette, a gesture that seemed to offend the cardinal even more than his words. "Your Eminence, can I ask you something? When was the last time you made someone smile? Not through fear or duty or obligation, but just because you brought a little joy into their day." The question hung in the air like incense smoke. Cardinal Fontana stared at Dean, clearly caught off guard by being questioned rather than lectured to. "My purpose is not to make people smile, Mr. Martin. My purpose is to guide them toward eternal salvation, even if that path requires sacrifice and suffering in this life." "And that's where we differ," Dean said, taking a thoughtful drag from his cigarette. "See, I think God wants people to be happy. I think He wants them to fall in love, to sing songs, to dance, to enjoy the life He gave them. I think suffering might be inevitable, but I don't think it's the point." Cardinal Fontana stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone floor with a sound like judgment itself. "Mr. Martin, your theology is not only wrong, it's dangerous. You are encouraging people to pursue earthly pleasures instead of heavenly rewards. You are teaching them that this life matters more than the next one." Dean remained seated, looking up at the cardinal with something approaching pity. "Your Eminence, what if this life and the next life aren't separate things? What if how we treat each other here, how much love we share, how much joy we create, what if that's exactly what heaven is supposed to be?" The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of traffic filtering down through layers of stone and morality. Cardinal Fontana found himself facing something he had never encountered before, a man who challenged church doctrine, not with anger or rebellion, but with genuine spiritual conviction that ran counter to everything the cardinal believed. "You're suggesting that pleasure and virtue are compatible," Cardinal Fontana said, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "That's the oldest heresy in the book, Mr. Martin. The flesh and the spirit are at war. One must be conquered for the other to triumph." Dean stubbed out his cigarette in an ashtray that seemed to appear from nowhere. "Maybe they don't have to be at war. Maybe the war is the problem, not the solution." This was heresy of the highest order, and Cardinal Fontana felt the full weight of his responsibility to stamp it out before it could spread. "Mr. Martin, I'm going to be very direct with you. The Vatican has significant influence with Catholic organizations worldwide. We can arrange boycotts of your records, your films, your television appearances. We can instruct priests to condemn your influence from the pulpit. We can make it very difficult for you to earn a living." Dean's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. The room suddenly felt smaller, more dangerous. When Dean spoke again, his voice was still calm, but it carried an edge that hadn't been there before. "Are you threatening me, Your Eminence? I'm offering you a choice. You can modify your act to align with Catholic values, eliminate references to alcohol, tone down the romantic content, perhaps even include some explicitly religious material. In return, the Church will support your career rather than oppose it." Dean stood up slowly, adjusting his tie with deliberate care. "That's very generous of you, but I'm going to have to decline." Cardinal Fontana was stunned. In 30 years of enforcing Vatican policy, no one had simply refused his ultimatum. "Mr. Martin, I don't think you understand what you're walking away from. The Catholic Church has over 600 million members worldwide. I understand perfectly, Dean said, moving toward the door. But here's what I think you don't understand. Those 600 million people don't belong to you. They belong to themselves. And if they choose to listen to my music instead of your sermons, maybe that says something about what they're looking for in life. He paused at the door and turned back to face the Cardinal one final time. Your Eminence, you asked me to modify my act to align with Catholic values. But what if my act already aligns with the most important Catholic value of all? Love. Love for life. Love for other people. Love for the gift of existence itself. What if the problem isn't that I'm corrupting Catholic values, but that you've forgotten what they really are? The silence that followed was deafening. Cardinal Fontana stood frozen behind his mahogany table, surrounded by his evidence of moral decay, facing a man who had just challenged 2,000 years of church doctrine with nothing more than common sense and uncommon courage. Dean opened the door and stepped into the hallway, where the young priest was waiting to escort him out. As they walked through the maze of corridors beneath St. Patrick's Cathedral, Dean could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on him. Centuries of fear disguised as faith, of control disguised as guidance, of suffering disguised as virtue. But he could also feel something else, the certainty that he had spoken the truth, even if it was a truth that powerful institutions weren't ready to hear. The Vatican's campaign against Dean Martin began within hours of the meeting's conclusion. Catholic newspapers published editorials condemning his influence on youth. Priests were instructed to warn their congregations about the spiritual dangers of secular entertainment. Catholic organizations launched boycotts of his records and films. But something unexpected happened. Instead of destroying Dean's career, the Vatican's opposition only made him more popular. Catholics around the world began to see him as a symbol of joy and freedom, standing against institutional oppression. His record sales actually increased. His concerts sold out faster than ever. The Church's attempt to control had backfired spectacularly. More importantly, Dean's message began to resonate far beyond the entertainment industry. His simple assertion that happiness and spirituality could coexist struck a chord with people who had grown weary of being told that suffering was the only path to salvation. He had given them permission to find God in laughter, in love, in the simple pleasure of being alive. Cardinal Fontana never recovered from the failure of his campaign against Dean Martin. He spent his remaining years watching the Catholic Church slowly abandon many of the rigid doctrines he had spent his life defending, as Vatican II brought a new spirit of openness and joy to Catholic worship. He died in 1974, convinced that the Church had lost its way, never understanding that it had simply found a better one. Dean Martin continued singing love songs for the rest of his career, bringing joy to millions of people around the world. He never spoke publicly about his confrontation with the Vatican, but those who knew him well said it had reinforced his belief that the best way to serve God was to serve his people, not by making them afraid, but by making them happy. The secret meeting beneath St. Patrick's Cathedral lasted 90 minutes, but its effects rippled through both the entertainment industry and the Catholic Church for decades. It proved that sometimes the most powerful form of rebellion is simply refusing to be ashamed of joy, and that the greatest threat to institutional authority isn't anger or violence, but the quiet insistence that life is meant to be celebrated, not endured. Dean Martin had faced down the Vatican with nothing more than common sense and uncommon courage, and he had won not by destroying his opponent, but by exposing the poverty of a worldview that saw happiness as the enemy of holiness. In the end, both men were trying to serve the same master. They just disagreed about whether that master wanted his children to suffer or to sing. Dean Martin chose singing, and the world chose with him.